Hello my loves and welcome back to my channel. I know I've been gone for a little while. What if I told you my phone's camera broke and I had to replace my entire cell phone? I also got a new job. August has just been fucking chaotic for me, but it's Sunday as you're watching this. So here we are. We are officially in the final weeks of August. Because I'm so excited for fall and I'm almost ready to decorate for fall, completely revamping my entire house, I decided that today would be the perfect day to give you some fall recommendations. So I have 12 books to recommend to you in this video that I consider to be the perfect books to read during the fall/autumn time. If you're looking for cozy atmosphere, fun vibes, a little bit of spook, a little bit of eeriness, just in general, the kind of book that you would read under a woven blanket in the chill of the autumn air. That's a very cheesy thing to say, but you know exactly what I mean, okay? These are the books that have the vibe, so without further ado, let's jump on it. The first book that I have to recommend to you is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is the story of a witch. She lives in England. She has magical powers. Witches exist, but they're forced to live in hiding. So the humans, the mortals, can never know that witches exist. But she has an online persona where she pretends to be a witch, giving people advice about spells and practices, herbal medicines, things like that. One day, this family that has 3 young girls watches her videos, recognize that she is a real witch. She has actual magical powers, and that's exactly what they need because they have 3 little girls who are also witches and need magical training, especially as someone is bearing down on their home. This is a rom-com because the romance is between our main character, who is the witch, and the librarian at this family home that she ends up falling in love with. While this romance wasn't my favorite romance in the world, this book 100% delivers on the cozy fall atmosphere and vibes. It's much more about family and the relationships between the people in this book in terms of the familial sense, but it is still such a cute and cozy time, and it is a perfect book to read during the fall. And then I have a scary book because I fucking love horror. The book I'm going to recommend to you is If You See Her by Anya Alburn. I'm going to keep this brief. This is the story of 3 young boys in Michigan in the 90s. They end up breaking into this old abandoned house that is supposedly haunted because they live in small town Michigan, and they're like, well, what else is there to do? They go and do that, and unfortunately one of their friends ends up taking their own life. Then we flash forward many years in the future where the remaining 2 men are now grown men with families of their own. And this is a story about possession because there was something going on in that house and it's now haunting our main character. I found this book deeply creepy and disturbing because of the aspects of how our main character ended up losing his sense of self and his control over his reality and his mental state. This is truly about a story that takes place mostly in his mind as he is being possessed by this spirit. If you find that kind of stuff disturbing, I think that you will find this disturbing, and it is kind of like watching a scary movie is what I would say this reads like. It's very well written, it is very enjoyable, and 100% has the scare factor. This is the kind of book that lingers and stays with you. Then we move on to murder mysteries because this list is truly indicative of how I actually read. An Unwanted Guest by Sherry Lapina. An Unwanted Guest by Sherry Lapina is a classic, isolated, cold weather, snowy murder mystery. We have a group of people who have, for one reason or another, decided to go to this chalet in upstate New York to escape, to get some relaxation, enjoy the winter time, whatever. They get there, they're snowed in, they can't escape, and they stay overnight, but the next morning they find a dead body and they realize that someone is picking them off one by one, and they're trying to figure out who exactly is the threat and how do they neutralize this threat. It is a classic murder mystery where people are dying off slowly. We have the classic build of tension where everyone's kind of getting paranoid and afraid. It has a snowy setting, but I would consider this a late fall book and not really a winter book, even though I think it's in winter. The vibes scream fall. One of my favorite gothic books, we have a few gothic books on this list, is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kirsten White. This is the story of Frankenstein, I guess, but retold from the perspective of Dr. Frankenstein's wife. Kristen White imagines the story of the woman who marries Dr. Frankenstein, how they came together, how she was always forced to kind of tame his temper and his very obvious God complex, and the extent and like horrifying nature of what actually went into Dr. Frankenstein's monster and how he created that monster, and very much about Elizabeth and what it was like for her to witness that, and the ways that her husband tried to control and manipulate her, and how she felt stuck in her circumstances, and watching her husband quite literally become a monster. It is Gothic literature. It is beautifully written. If you don't like lyrical writing, you probably won't like this, but if you do like lyrical writing and you like a Gothic story, this is a really enjoyable read in the sense of just how well done it is. I would consider this a character study, but of course it's Frankenstein retold, so it's the perfect fall book. Wow. Sticking in the Gothic themes here, we have Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I love this book so much that I own a special edition of it. Gallant by V.E. Schwab, I would describe as an aged up middle grade. It's a little bit too young to be YA, but it's not so young in middle grade that it feels like you're reading a chapter book. If anything, I think that there are some mature themes throughout this book. Gallant by V.E. Schwab is a story of this girl who essentially left at this, I don't know what you would call it, like a place where nuns live and they like send abandoned children. So she lives there. This is a terrible summary. Anyway, one day she gets a letter from her uncle, who she has never, ever, ever heard of, saying that they've been looking for her for a long time. They really miss her and she needs to go up to Gallant, their family estate and their family home. She has always had a hard time, not only because of her living situation, just not being well treated as an orphan, but because our main character is also mute and people tend to treat her poorly because of this, and they really make fun of her. They try to put her through pain to see if she'll scream. Obviously she does not. She just had a terrible time, so she goes up to the family estate in Gallant to find that her uncle died several months ago, and no one actually has any idea who she is or why she received this letter. And the cover will tell you this is a portal fantasy. There is another world. It is very Gothic. There is involvement of death and death as a character. I really enjoyed this book so much. It's exactly what I look for in Gothic fiction, and as I mentioned, even though it definitely does read young and you should set your expectations that it does read young, it does not read so young that you could not enjoy it. And a graphic novel, just in case you want something a little bit lighter, this is Squad by Maggie Takuta Hall. This is a beautifully illustrated graphic novel about this girl who moves to a new school. She's having a bit of a hard time with this transition. One day she goes to the bathroom and there's a girl there who needs a tampon, so she gives her a tampon and they become fast friends. She gets invited into like their girl group, and they're werewolves. They're man-eating werewolves, and she ends up involved in all of this. It is obviously a fantasy. What I love about this is the illustrations and the color palette of this book is absolutely stunning. It is such a quick read, and it is a very feminist read as well. And of course, it's the perfect fall book because they are literally man-eating werewolves. It does get graphic at times, and it's sapphic as well. Like, what else do I need to tell you to sell you to read this book? It is just a perfect fall book if you're looking for a quick read. Our first of two Kate Alice Marshalls. This is 13s by Kate Alice Marshall, which is her middle grade series. This is obviously the perfect fall read because it is set in the days leading up to Halloween. In this book, you are following a young girl who is forced to live with her aunt and uncle. I won't tell you why because you find that out later in the story, but she has moved to this small town and she is turning 13 on Halloween. However, some of the adults in this town are super fucking creepy, and she is seeing things that other people are not seeing, until one day two of her classmates, who also happen to be turning 13 on Halloween, tell her that they have been seeing the exact same thing, and they realize that they are caught up into some kind of mystical sacrificial ritual going on in their town. For a middle grade book, and for a book in general, not just middle grade, it is so enjoyable. If you were were a Goosebumps kid, I think that you will enjoy this book. It is very well written. It definitely gets weird, as Kate Alice Marshall book tends to do. I'm always here for the weird, spooky times. And it is quite literally set on Halloween. It is the perfect Goosebumps fall atmosphere, but actually make it scary with some real threats, but still keep in mind that it's a middle grade kind of story. Another middle grade. These two books are actually part of the same series. I'm gonna recommend to you The Haunting of Evelyn Jones, which is quite literally for the Goosebump kid. Evelyn Jones is a young girl. She's about 12 years old, living in the UK, and she's gonna go visit her aunt at her seaside cottage because her mother has something to go and do. Evelyn has always been obsessed with ghost stories, with spooky stories, with all things Halloween, eerie, gothic, weird. I was also that kid, so I resonate and relate with Evelyn quite a bit. And while she's up there, she ends up going to like this very overrun, crowded bookstore, and she finds this diary, which she finds out belonged to this young girl who went missing quite a while ago. Anyway, Evelyn is on ghost hunting adventures, okay? That is the premise. I'm gonna recommend to you The Haunting of Evelyn Jones for all of the cozy Halloween, fall, English seaside country vibes with some mystery elements, some fantasy, some paranormal horror, and just general good times. Another middle grade. Clearly, I am just in my middle grade era. This is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden, another book set in the fall time, right around Halloween. In this book, you are following another young girl who lives with her father, who is a single father. Her mother passed away a while ago, and she is dealing with the grief of losing her mother and adjusting to what her family looks like now. One day, she's riding her bike back from school, and she sees this woman crying by a river, and this woman is completely devastated, and she's about to take a book and throw it into the river. And our main character is like, you can't do that to a book, you have to donate it. So despite the woman's protest, she snatches the book and she runs away with it. And there she reads a super creepy story in a series of creepy stories. But the next day she goes on a school trip to a farm. And when she gets there, she realizes that a lot of the things that were written in that book that she picked up might actually be true. It's another kind of portal fantasy. It is very spooky, very eerie, definitely has the Goosebumps vibe. I'd say it's a little bit truer to Goosebumps because it is a little bit silly, but if you're looking to recapture what that felt like for you reading Goosebumps as a kid in the fall time, this is a great book to pick up. The later books in the series are also enjoyable, and they get spookier and spookier each time as the kids age up. It's a great time if you're looking for another easy middle grade read. And how could I talk to you about fall recommendations without talking to you about Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo? This, in my mind, is a dark academia book and therefore is perfect for the fall season. Ninth House is a story of Galaxy Alex Stern, who wakes up in the hospital one day after a drug overdose to find the admissions people of Yale are at her bedside, and they tell her that Yale actually has a secret society, a bunch of secret societies who practice witchcraft and magic, and Alex can see ghosts. That is a power that is really, really relevant to them and the upkeep of these secret societies, one of which is Ninth House, the house that looks after every other society and makes sure they aren't like summoning demons or some shit. That's essentially it. She ends up going to Yale because it is an opportunity. I think it's Yale, it could be Princeton, who the fuck knows. She does go, the book opens up, we have a mystery because one of her friends has disappeared and she's trying to solve it, but also trying to navigate this magical world that she's been exposed to and dealing with all of the trauma in her past. This is a dark story. This is a heavy story. You need hella content warnings. And yes, the first 50% of the book is confusing because Miss Bardugo just jumps in and she throws you into the deep end and you've got to swim to find your way. I read this at the beginning of the year. It quickly became a favorite, with Hellbent, its sequel, being my personal favorite so far in the series. And I highly recommend if you like dark academia and you love the idea of magic and ghosts and paranormal spooky elements. And of course, you saw it coming. My final book recommendation recommendation, These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall. These Fleeting Shadows is the story of a 17-year-old girl who lives with her mother and her stepfather. One day they get a letter from their family letting them know that the grandfather has passed, her mother's father. Now, she and her mother fled the manor that the family lives at when she was very, very young. So she has no memories of it, and her mother is just very suspicious and very wary of going. But they do go for the grandfather's funeral, and there our main character finds out that her grandfather has left her everything, the entire estate, all of his money, and she is to be the next leader and property manager of this estate. She's very confused as to why, but it is an obscene amount of money, and it would be very useful for her and her family. The requirement for her to actually get this is that she has to live at the estate with her extended family for 1 year. The house has to accept her as its master. While she's there, she runs into a forest witch who is telling her more about the dark and disgusting history of her family and this estate. And this book is so good. Yes, it is sapphic. Yes, it is gothic. Yes, it is beautifully written. It is a YA, but honestly, I didn't even realize it was a YA until our female character told us how old she was, and I was like, oh, this is a YA. Why I love this book is at the ending. The ending just does it for me so well. Kate Alice Marshall really got me, because I was like, what? I loved it. I loved it. Sapphic horror set in a creepy ass fucking estate. Big ass mansion set in the woods with a dark, gruesome, and disgusting history. That brings us to the end of this video. Let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you have other recommendations for books that you feel are perfect to read in the fall time. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you have not already. Love you so much, and I'm gonna see you in my next video, which hopefully is sometime soon. But as I mentioned, I am starting a new job, and my schedule is gonna get super busy. Plus, my best friend's getting married next weekend, so busy times ahead.